Okay, I've made this go live on YouTube. For the record, this is position 99 on my calendar. Today is November 9th, 2022. My name is Brad Gardner. I'm going to be the judge presiding over this hearing. State of Georgia versus Jamarion Keontez Muse. Mr. Muse is charged in warrant number 2022 CW 54778 with committing the offense of murder. He's charged in warrant number 2022 CW 54779 with committing the offense of aggravated assault. And he's also charged in warrant number 2022 CW 54780 with committing the offense of aggravated assault. Mr. Muse is present here in court today. He's represented by Eutrophia Robinson. And the state is represented by Evan Hansinger. Mr. Hansinger, would you swear in your witness and we can get started? Detective Walker, are you there? Okay.
I am, Judge.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Hansinger.
Yes, Judge. And just before we get started, I'm not sure if Your Honor is aware that your video is not currently functioning. We just can't see you. Here we go, Judge.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Detective Walker, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm testimony you're about to give in this matter is truth, the whole truth, nothing but truth, so help you God?
I do.
You can lower your hand. Can you introduce yourself and spell your name for the record?
Detective Abram Walker, Abram Walker, Walker.
And Officer Detective Walker, whom are you employed by?
Clayton County Police.
And how long have you been with Clayton County?
A little over 8 years now.
And has all that time been in the capacity of detective, or how long have you been detective?
Detective 2 years now.
Okay. And were you a detective on December 26th of last year?
I was.
Okay. On that day, did you have occasion to be called to 1108 Brookstone Road?
Excuse me, attorney. I apologize. What was your question again?
Yes. Were you on December 26th of last year called to 1108 Brookstone Road?
I was.
And what was that in reference to?
A shooting.
Okay. And is that location within Clayton County?
Yes, it was.
Okay. When you arrived on scene, can you kind of lay out what your first things you encountered were?
Okay, let me first begin by stating that there are several parties within this case. So while I'm testifying, it may sound a little discombobulated, but please forgive me. I'll do the best I can. But again, I apologize to the court up front. It's a lot of several entities in this case. So Clayton County officers did respond to 1108 Brookstone Road in reference to a shooting. Upon arrival, officers did locate the deceased victim, Mr. Olatunji Okoya, laid out on the street. They also was able to speak with the second victim, Mr. Ayu Zano. Mr. Zano, I did respond later in the evening.
And there sounds like there's some background noise, but while
let me tell them to bring it down.
Okay.
I apologize, Judge. They're clear.
Okay, and I think I was going to say to Ms. Robinson, I've had Detective Walker and other detectives from CID testify, and basically what I understood his statement about several parties, that they're responding officers, and then depending on the level of difficulty or whatever, he's called in or his fellow detectives are called in. And I know you understand that, but I'm just saying that for the benefit of your client.
Yes, Your
So
Honor.
he's not the person that gets the call and comes out at immediately. So
Understood.
he has to rely upon what other officers are telling him about the scene. Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes, sir, Judge. Thank you, Judge. So, like I said, officers did arrive and locate the deceased victim and spoke with the second victim. The second victim, Mr. Zanu, he stated that the reason why he and his friend were there, this was all involved in reference to selling some iPhones. So Mr. Zanu stated that he was in business with the first offender, Therese Williams, which is better known as TJ. He and TJ had been discussing about selling some iPhones and meeting up to sell those iPhones. So Mr. Zanu stated on that day, TJ arrived at the scene in a white Dodge Charger with several other unknown black males inside the car at the time. He stated that he and TJ talked for a minute and he told TJ to go get the phones. He said that TJ got back into the car and the next thing you know, there was an unknown black male to get out of the car and take a weapon out and begin discharging the weapon. As a result, Mr. Okoye was shot and killed, and Mr. Zanu ran for his life. Mr. Zanu stated that he ran behind the building of 1108 Brookstone Road.
Okay, Detective. Let me interject you just so that we can kind of make sure some things are clear before we move on to later parts of your investigation.
Yes, sir.
So, when responding officers arrived, where was the deceased victim, Mr. Oyu, located?
Laid on the ground in the cul-de-sac.
Was he at that time deceased or was he transported?
Don't quote me, but from my understanding, he was called, I think they called it while en route. I'm not really sure if he was dead, if he was the time of death is on while he was on the street or if it was en route.
Okay, but he was not there when you arrived.
No, sir. No, sir. I didn't arrive until a little after midnight.
Okay. And there's a second individual, Mr. Zanu.
Yes, sir.
Was Mr. Zanu struck by any bullets?
No, he ran. He's the one who witnessed everything or witnessed the shooting. And as the shooting started, he took off running and he ran behind. These are like some apartments and he ran behind the apartment.
Okay. Mr. Zanu was communicating with an individual who he identified as TJ.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was Mr. Oyu also going to be involved in the sale of these iPhones?
Mr. Okoye, what happened was, from my understanding, Mr. Okoye had the actual phones. Mr. Zanu called Okoye over and brought the phones over so the transaction can take place.
Okay, so Mr. Okoye was going to be involved in this sale of phones?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And was the location, the 1108 Brookstone Road, did somebody live at that location or what was the significance of that location?
Mr. Okoye actually lived at 1108 Brookstone Road.
Okay. Did any of the defendants live there or were they coming from another location?
No, sir, but actually Therese Williams, TJ, he actually lives on Brookstone Road, but is further up on Brookstone Road.
Okay. And was the plan all along for them to meet at 1108 Brookstone Road, or had they had plans to meet at a different location earlier in the day?
You know, Mr. Zanu did state that they were supposed to meet at the McDonald's on Cleveland Avenue, and there was some confusion, and there is a text message between Mr. Zanu and Mr. Williams about the meeting at the McDonald's in Cleveland Avenue, but they never met. So they actually changed the location to Mrs. Zanu's house.
Okay. And so when the defendants arrived, you said they arrived in a vehicle together, a Dodge Charger.
Say again, I'm sorry.
Yes, you said that the defendants in this case arrived in a Dodge Charger.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, attorney. Please say again.
You said the defendants arrived in a Dodge Charger to this incident location,
Yes.
and then one of the defendants got out of the vehicle at some point and retrieved a firearm,
Yes.
and then started just kind of spraying at everybody, spraying bullets.
Yes.
I should say.
Yes.
In terms of your investigation after that, other than Mr. Zanu, did you have occasion to speak to anybody else who was an eyewitness or was present at that time?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So a few days later, a couple of days later, the actual driver of the Dodge Charger, Mr. Tyler Davis, and his cousin, Mr. Christopher Davis, they came to police headquarters to tell us what happened. Mr. Tyler has a cash ride business on Instagram, and basically what he does is people contact him, they pay him a certain amount of money, and he will transport them to wherever they please, whatever they choose to. So on that day, the second offender, Ramon Stovall, better known as Draco, contacted him about bringing him to Brookstone Road. So he stated that on that day, Draco wanted him to meet him at 784 South Carter Drive. So Tyler drove his vehicle and Christopher rode with him. They arrived at 784 South Carter Drive. At this time, the second offender, Ramon Stovall, again, AKA Draco, he got in the vehicle along with several other vehicles. At least I think it was 2 to 3 other guys got into the car. They drove to 1108, I'm sorry, Brookstone Road. When they first got there, Tyler, he testifies that they initially stopped at a cul-de-sac. All of the guys got out of the car except for him and his cousin. They began talking to someone else, and TJ wanted him to drive to the second cul-de-sac. The second cul-de-sac is where Mr. Zanu was located. So they drove down to the second cul-de-sac, according to Tyler and Christopher. There was some discussion, and they stated the next thing you know, someone started shooting. They didn't see who was shooting, but someone started shooting. And all of the guys jumped back into the car, and they began arguing amongst one another. And he stated that out of fear of his life, he drove off because these guys had, they just got done shooting someone. He was instructed to take them back to 784 South Carter Drive, and that's what he did. Tyler states that he did recognize the second offender, Ramon Stovall. So did his cousin, Christopher, stated that he recognized Draco. His cousin also stated that he recognized Therese Williams, which was sitting in the far left portion of the vehicle. They were able to provide me with Instagram names of Therese and Ramon. I was able to obtain the Instagram, get a search warrant, obtain the Instagram pages of both Therese and Ramon. So I began to center my investigation on the date of the murder.
Okay,
It just
Detective, before you get into the Instagram records, I just want to make sure that it's clear, because I know that's kind of the final aspect of your investigation.
Okay.
So the Davises were providing rides for hire basically through Instagram,
Yes, sir.
and one of the co-defendants, Mr. Draco, arranged for a ride to the incident location.
Yes.
Okay, and the Davises were able to identify Mr. Draco and Mr. TJ, the defendant, Mr. TJ.
Tyler was able to identify Draco. Christopher was also able to identify Draco. Christopher was also able to advise that TJ was there as well.
Okay, and TJ was the individual who Mr. Zanu was arranging the sale with.
Yes.
Okay, so at that point, then you begin investigating their Instagram records.
Yes, sir. I got the Instagram records for TJ and I got the Instagram records for Draco. Within the messages of both Instagram pages, both of them were identified. They began to talk about the sale, and one key factor that they talked about was where's the Africans? They talked about that. Within the same dates of the Instagram records on Therese, I also located an Instagram record of JAEYPCF. So, and within the messages between JAEYPCF and TJ, they were also talked about the Africans, the cell phones, and they actually began talking on December the 23rd, days before the murder. So I began to center my investigation on JAEYPCF. I was able to get a search warrant, obtain the Instagram records of JAEYPCF. Once I got that Instagram page back, I located the phone number and the email address of JAEYPCF. I did get a search warrant for the phone number of JAEYPCF and the email address to see if I can locate if this JAEYPCF was in the area. I was not able to obtain that. However, that doesn't mean that the person did not turn off their GPS. But I did identify the phone number to Mr. Jamarian Muse. Within the Instagram records of JAEYPCF and TJ, they talked about a lot of, specifically JAEYPCF talked about how they can do the transaction. And I can actually read it if you like. But based on the actual messages, several messages between JAEYPCF and Therese, I did speak to the district attorney about it to make sure that this would be enough probable cause to go forward with the arrest warrant. And we decided that yes, based on these messages that was between Mr. Muse and TJ, it was enough for a probable cause to obtain an arrest warrant. Now,
Okay, Detective, in terms of, I want to dive into kind of what you did find there.
okay.
So you mentioned the African, talks about the African. Who
Yes.
were you able to identify who that was in reference to?
The Africans was Mr. Zano and Mr. Okoye.
Okay. And there was discussions about a transaction with phones.
Yes,
Okay, and
and the amount that the phones would cost.
okay. Was there any communication from Mr. Muse regarding the phones?
Yes,
And was there any communication from Mr. Muse to TJ, his co-defendant, who was arranged with the sale of those phones? Was there any communication about this being a setup?
the way the wording was from Mr. Muse, yes.
Okay,
The way it was worded.
Can you explain to the court what you mean in terms of, I mean, if you have the wording of what that language is?
Yes. May I read the wording, please?
Yeah, if you want to reference your report and then look back up and let us know what your memory is.
Well, I have the actual Instagram records. That's what I was referred to. May I?
So I think what Mr. Hansinger is trying to tell you, Mr. Walker,
Okay.
is that you're free to refer to a document to refresh your recollection. Reading from the document, hold on. Reading from the document, that document then becomes evidence that you have to give to Ms. Robinson so that she can read it. Because if you're reading from the document, you may miss a word or two. And she has every right to look at what you're reading and to determine whether you skipped a word or two.
Yes,
So,
sir.
And not to interrupt, there is someone who's on a Samsung. I don't know who it is. I'm not sure if there's an officer who it is.
I have kicked that person off, I think 3 times. I've asked that person. Okay, ma'am,
I'm for Jamari, yes.
can you identify yourself, please?
I'm Kishari niece. I'm his first cousin. My aunt couldn't tune in because she's busy.
You're who? I didn't understand that.
Your Honor, I believe she's
Kishari?
identified herself as family of Mr. Muse.
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, ma'am, you should not have been given this link. That was a question I asked of your.
Oh, okay.
Hold on, ma'am. That was a question I asked of the lawyer that's representing Mr. Muse. So you are perfectly, this is being streamed on YouTube. You're perfectly welcome to go and look at the stream on YouTube. But when you come on this setting, it's as if you're sitting at the defense table.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna remove you, ma'am. Do not come
Okay.
back in. You're perfectly welcome to go to YouTube and to view this.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Miss. Detective Walker, did you have an opportunity to review the document while we were on the
Yes, sir.
on the side? And Miss Robinson, if you have an objection, lodge the objection. But I do, because hearsay is allowed in these proceedings, I don't take a stringent approach to this. I mean, and I know generally the lawyer is here to get as much information as possible.
Yes, sir, I understand. And I do reserve or waive any hearsay objections, but I would ask if he is going to read directly from the document, that it be published so that I can see it.
So, Detective Walker, are you going to read directly from the document, or are you going to use the document to refresh your memory about the question that was asked of you from Mr. Hansen?
I don't have to read. I mean, she can have, well, it's up to the attorney if she wants a copy of the Instagram records, but I can speak on basically around about what some of the things that were said.
Well, and generally it's a timing issue. She's gonna get this information through the normal course of discovery. But if this is something that you're relying upon at this stage,
Okay.
meaning you're reading from it verbatim,
Okay.
she has a right to have access to that document now.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hansinger, ask the question again, and then we'll get the answer from Detective Walker.
Yes, Detective Walker, can you, to the best of your abilities, give the court an understanding of what the Instagram message was relating to this potentially being a setup?
He stated that Mr. Muse stated that he knows how they can fake it. They talked about how much. Well, TJ asked. He asked about the phones. How much of the phones they talked about is $675 a phone. In response, Mr. Muse tells TJ he knows how they can fake it. He tells TJ how they can fake putting some things in a bag and pretend like those were the phone. And he would smash off with the phones.
Okay, what does smash off mean?
From my understanding, take and run.
Okay, so it was your, okay. It was your understanding that they would be putting things in the bag to make it seem like they're.
Mr. Hansinger, hold on one second. I'm always thinking about how to keep things moving along. Mr. Schoolcraft, did you say that you needed to speak to Ms. Freeman?
Yes, Judge. I actually got invited into a room 2. Is that the room she was supposed to be in? And nobody was there but me.
Well, it's going to be room 1. Miss Freeman. Is this something? Do you want to monitor this hearing, or is it something I can place you and Mr. Schoolcraft in a breakout room to deal with whatever it is that
You can place me in a breakout room with Attorney Schoolcraft. It shouldn't take long.
Okay, I'm gonna, Miss Schoolcraft and Miss Freeman, I'm gonna place you both in room 1.
All right,
And
thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
And Officer Nimmons, you're excused.
okay. So, Mr. Schoolcraft, you're in room 1, and Ms. Freeman, you're in room 1. So the two of you can break off and have whatever discussion that you need to have.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. And I apologize to the members of this hearing, but I'm trying to move things along so that we're not all just sitting here having dead time and dead air. Mr. Schoolcraft, you should be able to click on the link that was sent to you earlier.
It hasn't shown up, Judge. The other one was for breakout room number 2.
I have you in breakout room number 1.
Oh, okay, because I don't.
If you just click on breakout room, Attorney Schoolcraft, it should then take you to breakout room 1. There won't be a new link once you've already been to a breakout room.
Oh, okay. I got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansinger. And I do apologize for interrupting you. But let's pick it up and just move from where we left off.
Okay, Detective Walker. So based on that communications, it was your impression that this was some sort of a setup to get either money or phones?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have any indication that Mr. Muse was physically present with the other defendants during the shooting?
No, sir. Just based on the messages within the Instagram, and as a result, this man getting killed, sounded like some type of robbery that was about to go down. Again, I don't have any physical or witnesses saying that he was there, but I'm going by just his text message and how everything was. It appeared to be like a setup. That's pretty much what I have.
Okay. No further questions at this time, subject to redirect.
Ms. Robinson?
Okay. Good morning, Detective Walker. I do have a few questions for you. And just for clarification, under direct examination, you stated that the victim, the murder victim, Mr. Okoye, am I pronouncing that right? Is it Okoye?
It's good. That's good for me.
Okay. You said that Mr. Okoye had the phones. So can you clarify for the court who was in possession of the phones that were supposed to be sold?
What I stated was it was my understanding that he had the phones. I'm
Okay.
not really sure who had the phones. But the only thing I can tell you is that there was a meet between Mrs. Zanu. Mrs. Zanu was actually there first, and then Mr. Okoye drove over there. It was my understanding that Mr. Okoye had the phones for the phones to be dispersed.
So you also gave an address earlier that you stated which one did you state that Mr. Okoye lived at the address of the?
Mrs. Zanu lived at 1108 Brookstone. Mr. Okoye lived at Hampton.
Okay. Now you mentioned two other individuals, Therese Williams and a Mr. Ramon, I believe you called him Draco. Are those two individuals in custody?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you also stated that they obtained a ride from two individuals you identified as Tyler Williams and his cousin, Christopher Williams.
Yes, ma'am.
Was it your testimony? I want to clarify that the Williams cousins were present during this incident. Davis, I'm sorry. That the Davis cousins were present during the incident.
Yes.
Both Tyler and Christopher.
Yes.
And were Tyler and Christopher passengers in the Dodge Charger?
Tyler was the driver.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So my understanding in this Dodge Charger is Tyler Davis,
Tyler,
Christopher Davis,
Christopher,
Therese James,
Therese Williams,
excuse me, Ramon Stovall, and another unknown individual.
Two other unknown vehicles.
Two others. So yeah. In a sedan.
One or two unknown individuals. I don't know who they are.
So you don't know the.
Yes, I didn't. It's my assumption. Well, we're not gonna go with assumption. I don't know.
Okay. But it sounds like there's more than 5 individuals in a 4-door passenger vehicle.
Attorney, yes, ma'am. I asked the same question as doing this investigation, and they stated that yes, all these guys jumped inside of this Charger.
Okay, and at no time did Mr. Tyler Davis, Christopher Davis, identify my client, Mr. Jamarion Muse, did they?
They did not.
Okay. And you said that you obtained a search warrant for an Instagram account by the handle of JAEYPCF.
JAEYPCF, yes.
And could you please explain again how you were able to connect that Instagram account to Jamarion Muse?
That was through TJ's account of the Wixit 2 WIXKED. That account is Therese Williams' Instagram account. That's how I was able to obtain JAEYPCF.
So the crux of your investigation that connects Mr. Muse to this incident is through messages that you have identified with Mr. Muse on Instagram between that account and Mr. Therese Williams's account?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you said that the two individuals in this Instagram transaction that they had began talking on December the 23rd? Yeah,
it goes back to December 23rd. They actually talk all the way to December I'm sorry, December 31st, but I centered on December 23rd because this is when they began to talk about what he's paying and all that good stuff.
Okay. And were there messages after this incident where there was any discussion of the incident that happened?
I didn't censure on that. I didn't see any other messages after the murder. I didn't see any other message. I mean, they was talking, but I didn't see anything pertaining to the murder investigation.
You don't have any messages during the time of the murder between these two individuals, do you?
On the date of the murder?
On the date of the murder?
Yes.
Okay. And what for the record, what was the time that this incident took place?
The murder?
What time was the police called?
It was approximately 8:30-ish, between 8:30 and 8:45.
Is this PM?
Yes.
Okay. You have messages between these two Instagram accounts around that time?
I'm sorry?
You have messages between these two Instagram accounts around that time?
I would have to look at it.
Okay. And so is it your testimony to the court today that this is the only evidence that you have that connects Jamarion Muse to this incident? Messages between an account by the name of JAEYPCF and Therese Williams?
Yes, based on the messages that was stated and
did any of those messages contain any confessions by the JAEYPCF account?
no confessions, just to set up.
Okay, just to set up. So the state actually does not have any, as by your own testimony, have any physical or other evidence that Mr. Muse was present at the scene of this incident?
No, ma'am.
We do not have any evidence, physical or otherwise, that Mr. Muse brandished any deadly weapon at either Mr. Okoye or Mr. Zanu.
I do not.
Okay. And the state does not have any eyewitness identification of Jamarion Muse being at the incident location at the time by any witnesses.
No, ma'am.
Okay. And did the state obtain any search warrant to search the Instagram accounts of the alleged victim, Mr. Zanu, and the deceased victim, Mr. Okoye? Do you have their Instagram account?
I didn't get any a search warrant to get the Instagram page of the deceased victim. I don't even know his Instagram page. Mrs. Zanu, I only got when I got the search warrant to obtain TJ's phone records, that's when I saw some of the text messages between him and TJ. But I don't recall Mrs. Zanu even having an Instagram page.
So the state wouldn't be able to say that there was ever any communication between Mr. Jamarion Muse and any of the victims in this case?
Not the victims, just TJ.
Okay. Give me just a moment here to review my notes, to see if there are any other questions. Regarding the ride share with Mr. Davis, is that a commercial ride share or is that something that he solicits as an individual? Is it a program like Lyft or Uber?
From my understanding, it's just something that he solicits.
Okay. Does the state have any messages between Ramon Stovall or Draco and Jamarion Muse?
No, Ramon's messages is just between he and TJ.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that I have for you at this time. Thank you very much, Detective.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hansinger, any follow-up?
Just briefly, Judge. Detective Walker, just so it's clear, in terms of these Instagram messages between Mr. Muse and the co-defendant TJ, those did any of those reference the Africans that or the victims in any way?
Yes,
Okay. They, just so that it's clear for the record, they did reference the Africans,
yes,
and the Instagram for JAYPCE, I believe that, or PCF.
JAEYPCF.
Yeah. How are you able to connect that account holder to being Mr. Muse?
When I obtained the search warrant and got the Instagram records back, they displayed the email address to the person and the phone number. I was able to identify the phone number of that Instagram JAEYPCF to Jamarian Muse. Also, I did speak with Mr. Muse, and he confirmed that this is his that is his Instagram page.
Okay. Nothing further, Judge.
I do have a question, Your Honor. Mr. Walker, did you speak with Mr. Muse after he informed you that he had obtained counsel?
I spoke with him initially, and he said he didn't want to speak. After he was arrested, and I didn't ask him any questions. After he was arrested and incarcerated in Clayton County Jail, I did come up and ask him, did he want to speak? He stated yes. I did read him Miranda rights, and that's when we spoke briefly.
Did Mr. Muse at any time tell you that he wanted to have his counsel present?
The second time?
Yes, when you spoke to him at the Clayton County Jail.
No.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, Mr. Hansinger, any follow-up based upon that?
No, Judge, state rests at this time.
Okay, and Ms. Muse, I asked you this question before, but I'm gonna ask you again. Is your intent to call any witnesses?
No, Your Honor, there will be no witnesses called on behalf of Mr. Muse today.
Okay, any argument?
Yes, we will have argument.
Mr. Hansinger, are you gonna waive opening or are you gonna?
State waives opening.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Robinson.
Yes, Your Honor. I do understand, the defense understands that the standard of proof and the burden of proof that the state has at this stage of proceedings is not beyond a reasonable doubt, but through the preponderance of the evidence. But Your Honor, as through the testimony that you've heard today, the defense finds it very unlikely that the state has even put on a preponderance of evidence that Mr. Muse, A, has committed the offense of malice murder, and B, the offense of aggravated assault. The state's witnesses admit that there are no eyewitness identifications of Mr. Muse at the scene. There's no physical evidence or any other evidence otherwise that places Mr. Muse at the scene. There is no witness or anyone else who places a deadly weapon, which is the required elements for proving aggravated assault or causing any bodily harm, or excuse me. That Mr. Muse physically brandished any deadly weapon or object or instrument, which when used offensively against another person would actually result in a bodily injury. Neither the victim nor any of these individuals that were in the car have identified Mr. Muse. By the state's own admission, the only evidence that they have are Instagram messages discussing some type of setup between an account which the state alleged belongs to Mr. Muse and one of the other defendants in this case. Your Honor, that doesn't even meet a preponderance standard. And Mr. Muse has not been identified as being present. And furthermore, the state is relying upon a discussion where the term Africans is used. And I'm assuming that the state is not attempting to make the argument that there are only 2 Africans in all of Clayton County. It wasn't clear if the victims in this case were selling or purchasing guns, not guns, phones. But at no point was there evidence that states that Mr. Muse was in possession of any phones, that Mr. Muse sold or purchased any phones. And I would ask that the court actually dismiss these charges against Mr. Muse because the preponderance of evidence standard haven't even been met, and which I understand is not beyond a reasonable doubt, but it has to be at least 50% and a feather. And all we've got here is a feather, that being Instagram conversation between a defendant who is in custody and an account which the state has linked to Mr. Muse. Those messages did not contain any confessions. Those messages did not discuss Mr. Muse being present. And therefore, Your Honor, we would stand by our motion that the court would dismiss these charges.
Mr. Hansinger?
Yes, Judge. To start with, Your Honor, just so it's clear, the standard at this point is merely probable cause at this point. And there certainly is enough evidence here to establish that Mr. Muse is a party to the crimes that occurred in this case. It's not the state's contention at this point that Mr. Muse was physically present, that he held the gun, that he pulled the trigger, that he did any of those things. But under the laws of this state, if you are conspiring with others to commit crimes, in this case a robbery, you are then liable for the actions of your co-conspirators in furtherance of that crime that you were carrying out. So here there's the Instagram records, which are tied back to Mr. Muse through his phone number, that is him. He's communicating with one of his co-conspirators about setting up a transaction of phones with some Africans. And then, you know, within a couple of days, there's this transaction with two individuals who the detective identified as being who was referenced to for a transaction of phones. And during that transaction, there's discussions even leading up to it about how there's not actually going to be a sale, that this is going to be a setup, and that they're going to take either money or phones from them during that transaction. And that's exactly what happened in terms of they then pull out firearms and open fire on the victims in this case. So although Mr. Muse was not physically present, he is, and there is evidence to show, a co-conspirator in this case, and his co-conspirators then did carry out these acts of a murder in terms of, you know, killing the victim in this case with malice, and an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon where they had that firearm and did shoot at not only the deceased victim, but Mr. Zanu as well. So there is probable cause here, Judge, and the state asks that you bind over all charges in this case against Mr. Muse as a co-conspirator.
Well, that's where I was thinking as I was hearing the evidence. Georgia doesn't have accomplice liability as party to a crime. And I believe the evidence is sufficient through the email or Instagram transactions that there's something there. And this may be a tough case for the state to prove at trial, but at this stage, probable cause is 51%. And I believe that the evidence is sufficient to bind this case over to the Superior Court, Clayton County, for it to have a trial. And so that's going to be my ruling.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Your Honor. I understand that this case is, well, Mr. Muse is also on a bond calendar for tomorrow, but would the court be in a position to hear us on bond today?
No. It'll.
The bond has to be heard in Superior Court because of the charge. Mhm.
Yes, Ms. Freeman, you don't let me. I try.
Judge,
Started speaking faster.
I apologize, Judge. I'm just trying to help you out. So
No. Ms. Freeman is right.
I understand.
The statute changed a year or so ago, and so these charges, where there's a potential for a person to serve life in prison, the bond hearing has to be held before a Superior Court judge, and I don't have that calendar handy. Ms. Freeman, I'm certain knows, but you would have to file a motion, and presiding judge will hear your motion for bond.
Understood, Your Honor.
Okay. All right.